The old piano in the corner of the nursing home's recreation room had seen better days. Its oak finish was scratched in places, and a few of the ivory keys had yellowed more than the others. But to Elena, it was perfect. Every morning at 5:30, before the residents woke and before the other staff arrived, Elena would slip into the room, set down her mop and bucket, and play. Her cleaning shift didn't officially start until 6, but she always came early for these precious moments alone with the piano. This particular Tuesday in late autumn, Elena's fingers danced across the keys as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows. She played from memory. She had never learned to read music properly. Her mother had taught her the basics on their family's old upright when she was a girl, and everything since had been by ear and by heart. She closed her eyes as she played her favorite Chopin nocturne. The melody rose and fell like gentle waves, filling the empty room with something beautiful. This was her time. For these 30 minutes each day, she wasn't just a cleaning lady, she was a musician. I didn't know we had a concert pianist on staff. Elena's hands froze on the keys. She turned to see Mrs. Chen, the nursing home director, standing in the doorway with her coffee mug in hand. "I'm sorry," Elena said, quickly standing up. "I didn't think anyone was here yet. I was just—" "No, please," Mrs. Chen said, stepping into the room. "Don't stop on my account." "That was lovely." Elena's cheeks flushed. In her 15 years working at Sunshine Valley Care Home, she had kept her morning ritual mostly private. A few residents knew. Mr. Wilson sometimes asked her to play his favorite songs, and Ms. Rivera would sit quietly in the corner, eyes closed, on the days her arthritis woke her early. But Elena had never played in front of her boss before. "How long have you been playing?" Mrs. Chen asked, settling into one of the armchairs as if preparing for the rest of the performance. "Since I was little," Elena replied, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her gray uniform dress. "My mother taught me." "Nothing formal." Mrs. Chen took a sip of her coffee. "Nothing formal? That sounded pretty formal to me. That was Chopin, wasn't it?" Elena nodded, surprised. "Nocturne in E-flat major." "I thought so. My daughter played it for her grade 8 exam." Mrs. Chen gestured toward the piano bench. "Would you play something else?" "I'm early today, too." Hesitantly, Elena sat back down. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment before she began to play again. This time it wasn't Chopin or any other famous composer. It was her own melody, something that had lived in her fingers for years, changing slightly each time she played it. When she finished, the room was silent except for the distant sound of the heating system coming to life. "Did you write that?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. Elena nodded, suddenly embarrassed. "It's nothing special. Just something I play sometimes." "It's beautiful," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Truly beautiful." She set her coffee mug on a side table and reached into her handbag, pulling out an envelope. "Actually, this might interest you. My daughter can't use these tickets, and I was going to put them on the staff room bulletin board, but I think you should have them." She handed Elena the envelope. Inside were 2 tickets to a piano masterclass with Dmitri Volkov at the city's Conservatory of Music. "The great Russian pianist?" Elena asked, her eyes wide. Mrs. Chen nodded. "He's in town for one concert and this masterclass. It's this Saturday." Elena stared at the tickets. She had heard Volkov on the radio, had even saved up once years ago to buy one of his recordings. The thought of seeing him in person made her heart race. "I can't accept these," she said, trying to hand them back. "They must be expensive." "They were a gift to my daughter from her piano teacher, but she has a volleyball tournament that day." "Please take them. You'll appreciate them more than anyone else I know." Before Elena could protest further, Mrs. Chen stood up. "I should get to my office. Those morning reports won't read themselves." "But Elena," she paused at the doorway, "you have a gift. Don't hide it away." For the rest of her shift, as Elena mopped floors and wiped down surfaces, the tickets burned in her pocket. She thought about them as she cleaned the bathrooms and as she changed the sheets on Mr. Wilson's bed after he had an accident. She thought about them as she ate her simple lunch of soup and crackers in the staff room. By the end of the day, she had convinced herself not to go. What place did she have at a fancy music conservatory? She was 62 years old, had never had a proper lesson, and didn't own anything nice enough to wear to such an event. As she waited at the bus stop after her shift, Elena pulled out the tickets and studied them. The masterclass would start at 2 o'clock. Students from the conservatory would play for Volkov, and he would critique their performances. the audience would observe. It wasn't a proper concert, but a chance to learn, to see inside the world of professional music. The bus came and went, but Elena remained on the bench, lost in thought. The next bus would come in 20 minutes. It was enough time to make a decision. She thought about her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture and the small electric keyboard she had bought at a yard sale 10 years ago. She thought about her late husband, Pavel, who had always encouraged her to play even when they could barely afford their rent. "Music feeds the soul when the wallet is empty," he used to say. Elena tucked the tickets back into her pocket and finally boarded the next bus. As it rumbled through the streets toward her neighborhood, she made a detour she rarely took. She got off near the thrift store 3 blocks from her apartment. Inside, she browsed the racks with purpose. She had exactly 3 days to find something suitable to wear. Nothing too flashy. She didn't want to stand out, but something nicer than her everyday clothes. After an hour of searching, she found a simple navy blue dress that fit her well enough. It was a little loose around the waist, but her neighbor Lily could help with that. Lily had been a seamstress before she retired. At home that evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her old address book. She found the number she was looking for and dialed it on her landline phone. "Hello? Lily, it's Elena from upstairs. I have a favor to ask. Do you still have your sewing machine?" By Friday evening, the dress had been altered. Her good shoes had been polished, and Elena had listened to every Dmitry Volkov recording she owned, which was exactly 2, the one she had splurged on years ago, and another Pavel had given her for their last anniversary before his heart gave out. She practiced on her keyboard with headphones, not wanting to disturb her neighbors. Her fingers were stiff from years of cleaning, and there were calluses that sometimes caught on the keys, but the music still flowed. She played until midnight, then set her alarm for early the next morning. She would need to practice again before the master class. Saturday dawned gray and drizzly. Elena woke before her alarm, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She made herself a piece of toast but could only manage a few bites. After practicing for an hour, she laid out her dress and took extra time with her hair, pinning it in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. As she dressed, Elena caught sight of herself in the small mirror above her dresser. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow, still plain, still bearing the marks of a life of hard work, but with a spark of something in her eyes that hadn't been there for a long time. "What would Pavel say if he could see me now?" she whispered to the empty room. She could almost hear his voice. He would say, "Go show them what real music sounds like, my Elena." The bus ride to the conservatory took 45 minutes. Elena held her umbrella tightly, watching the neighborhoods change from her familiar working-class streets to the more affluent areas downtown. The conservatory itself was an imposing stone building with tall windows and a grand entrance. As she approached, Elena saw groups of young people carrying instrument cases, moving with the easy confidence of those who belonged. For a moment, she almost turned back. What was she thinking? She didn't belong here among these talented young musicians and cultured music lovers. She was just a cleaning lady who played the piano for herself and sometimes for the old folks who had no one else to play for them. But then she felt the weight of the tickets in her purse and remembered Mrs. Chen's words, "You have a gift. Don't hide it away." Taking a deep breath, Elena climbed the steps to the entrance. She handed her ticket to a young man in a suit who smiled politely and directed her to the hall. With each step, she felt both more out of place and more determined. She might not belong here, but the music did, and for today at least, she would follow where it led. Inside the conservatory, warmth enveloped Elena as she closed her umbrella. The rain had soaked through her worn shoes and she could feel dampness between her toes. She tried to step carefully to avoid squeaking on the polished marble floor. The entrance hall buzzed with activity. Young people in crisp outfits huddled in groups, their laughter bouncing off the high ceiling. Older men and women in expensive coats examined the program booklets. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. "May I help you?" A young woman with a clipboard approached Elena. Her name tag read Student Volunteer. "I have a ticket for the master class," Elena said, fumbling in her purse. The ticket was slightly crumpled now, but still readable. The volunteer glanced at it and gave a practiced smile. "Main hall, through those doors. Seating is open, but the first 3 rows are reserved for conservatory students and special guests." Elena nodded her thanks and moved toward the doors. As she entered the hall, she was struck by its grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with scenes of dancing muses. The stage held a magnificent grand piano, its lid propped open, gleaming under the lights. Most of the good seats were already taken. Elena made her way to the back, finding an empty spot in the second-to-last row. She settled in, placing her damp purse on her lap, and took in her surroundings. 2 rows ahead, a group of students whispered, excitedly, pointing at passages in their sheet music. To her left, an elderly couple studied the program with tiny reading glasses perched on their noses. The woman wore pearl earrings that caught the light when she turned her head. Elena wished she had thought to buy a program. She hadn't realized they were being sold in the lobby. Without one, she felt even more like an outsider. A bell chimed softly and the murmurs in the hall quieted as a man in a dark suit walked onto the stage. He welcomed everyone to the master class and introduced the day's schedule. First, Maestro Volkov would give a short performance. Then selected students would play pieces they had prepared, and the maestro would offer his critique. Finally, there would be a brief reception where attendees could meet the maestro. Elena's heart quickened. She hadn't known she might actually meet Volkov. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The lights dimmed slightly and a hush fell over the audience. Then, from a side door, he appeared. Dmitry Volkov was taller than Elena had imagined from the small photo on her CD case. His silver hair was combed back from a high forehead, and his posture was straight despite his 70-some years. He wore a simple black suit with no tie, and he carried himself with quiet dignity. Without introduction, he seated himself at the piano, paused for a moment with his hands hovering above the keys, and began to play. The music started softly. Bach, Elena recognized, then built in complexity, his fingers moving with precision and feeling that made her lean forward in her seat. She watched his hands, noticing how effortlessly they covered the keyboard, how his pinky finger extended to reach a note that would have required her to shift her entire hand position. This was mastery, born of decades of disciplined practice. When he finished, the audience erupted in applause. Volkov acknowledged it with a slight bow of his head, then spoke for the first time, his accent thick, but his English clear. "Music is not about the notes," he said. "Notes are just symbols on paper. Music is about what happens in the space between the notes. It is about what you feel and what you make others feel." Elena felt as though he was speaking directly to her. This was what she had always believed, but had never heard articulated so perfectly. The masterclass began in earnest. A young man played a Beethoven sonata with technical brilliance, but, as Volkov pointed out, too much head, not enough heart. A young woman tackled a challenging Liszt piece, her fingers a blur across the keys, earning specific feedback about pedal technique and dynamics. During a brief intermission, people filed out to the reception area for refreshments. Elena stayed in her seat at first, uncertain whether she should join them. But curiosity won out, and she made her way to the elegant room where servers circulated with trays of champagne and tiny sandwiches. Elena took a glass but didn't drink from it. She stood against a wall watching the crowd. Everyone seemed to know someone. Conversations flowed around her about music theory, famous performers, and the latest recordings. Technical terms she'd never heard were tossed about casually. Gathering her courage, she approached a small group discussing a piece that had been played earlier. They were debating the merits of different interpretations of Chopin's nocturnes, something Elena felt she could contribute to, having played them for years. "Excuse me," she said during a pause in their conversation. "I couldn't help overhearing. I've always loved how Rubinstein played the E-flat nocturne." The group turned to look at her. A woman with sleek gray hair and a pearl necklace that matched her earrings gave Elena a quick once-over, taking in her simple dress and worn shoes. "Rubinstein?" the woman said, raising an eyebrow. "That's rather traditional, isn't it? Have you heard Sokolov's interpretation? Much more nuanced." Before Elena could respond, the woman had already turned back to the others, effectively dismissing her. The conversation continued as if she hadn't spoken. Heat rose to Elena's cheeks. She stepped back, clutching her untouched champagne. She should have known better than to try to join in. These people had studied music their whole lives, had traveled to hear the great pianists, had probably played in recitals since childhood. What did she know, really? Just what she felt when her fingers touched the keys in the quiet morning hours. Elena set her glass down on a nearby table and slipped out of the reception room. She found the restroom and stood in front of the mirror, taking deep breaths. Her face looked flushed and a strand of hair had escaped from her careful bun. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to her reflection. From outside, the bell chimed again, signaling the end of intermission. Elena smoothed her dress, fixed her hair, and reminded herself why she had come. For the music, not for the approval of strangers. Back in the hall, she returned to her seat just as the lights dimmed again. The second half featured more advanced students. Their playing was impressive, but Elena found herself distracted by the memory of being snubbed. The joy she had felt earlier was dimmed. A young woman in a sparkling blue dress played a Rachmaninoff prelude with such intensity that she rose slightly from the bench during the climactic passages. When she finished, Volkov praised her passion but suggested she find more subtlety in the quieter sections. "Music is like life," he told her, and everyone in the hall. "It is not all storm and thunder. Sometimes the most powerful moment comes in the smallest gesture." He demonstrated, playing a simple phrase with such tenderness that Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. This was why she had come. Not to be part of this world, but to learn from it. To take something back to her small keyboard in her tiny apartment. To play better for Mr. Wilson and Ms. Rivera, and for herself in those precious morning moments. As the masterclass neared its end, Volkov looked out at the audience. "Music belongs to everyone," he said. "Not just to those who study at conservatories or play in great halls. It belongs to anyone who opens their heart to it." Again, Elena felt as though he was speaking directly to her. Though she knew that was impossible, he didn't even know she existed. The final scheduled student played a complex modern piece that Elena didn't recognize. She could appreciate the technical skill but found herself unable to connect with the music emotionally. When the student finished, Volkov offered specific technical advice, then stood up from the piano bench. "Before we end," he said, surveying the audience, "I would like to try something different. Music is about communication, yes? But so often, we communicate only one way, from stage to audience. Today, I want to hear from you." A murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. "Would anyone from our audience like to play something brief? Not a full piece, perhaps just a minute or two. Something you love." Young people throughout the hall raised their hands eagerly. Volkov pointed to one, a young man who bounded up to the stage. He announced he would play the opening of a Prokofiev sonata. His performance was energetic and precise, earning appreciative applause. Volkov chose another volunteer, then another. Each played impressively difficult pieces, clearly showcasing years of formal training. Elena watched with admiration, but also with a growing sense that she did not belong in this room full of people who lived and breathed classical music in ways she never could. As the final volunteer returned to her seat, Volkov scanned the audience once more. "Anyone else?" he asked. The hall was quiet. Most of the students who wanted to play had already done so, and the other audience members were either not pianists or not brave enough to play in front of the renowned master. Elena sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, hoping to remain invisible in her back row seat. Yet somehow Volkov's gaze seemed to find her, lingering just long enough to make her heart skip. "You," he said, pointing directly at her. "The woman in the navy dress, in the back. Would you honor us with something?" All heads turned. Elena froze as dozens of curious eyes found her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. This couldn't be happening. "Don't be shy," Volkov encouraged, his voice kind. "We are all friends here. All lovers of music." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Elena knew she should say something, but words failed her. Finally, the woman with the pearl necklace from the reception turned around, her expression a mixture of surprise and barely concealed disdain. "Do you play?" she asked Elena, loud enough for those nearby to hear. It was the question that finally unfroze her. Did she play? It was like asking if she breathed. Slowly, Elena nodded and rose from her seat. Elena made her way down the aisle, aware of every eye upon her. The walk to the stage felt endless. Her legs trembled beneath her navy dress, and she wished she had worn something. Anything else. Something that wouldn't make her stand out as so plainly different from everyone else in this hall. Someone whispered as she passed. Another person shifted in their seat to get a better look at this unlikely volunteer. Elena kept her eyes fixed on the stage, on the gleaming grand piano that waited for her. At the steps to the stage, she hesitated. Maestro Volkov extended his hand to her, his eyes kind but curious. "Come," he said. "The piano does not bite," a few people chuckled. Elena took his hand and climbed the steps. Up close, the maestro seemed both more human and more impressive. Lines of laughter framed his eyes, and his hand was warm around hers. "What is your name?" he asked quietly, for her ears only. "Elena," she replied, her voice barely audible. He nodded and turned to the audience. "We have Elena with us today. She will share something with us." He guided her to the piano bench and stepped back, giving her space. Elena sat down, adjusting her position. The bench was higher than she was used to. The piano keys gleamed, perfectly white and black, not yellowed or chipped like the nursing home piano. For a moment, she was overwhelmed by the wrongness of it all. She didn't belong here. She had no piece prepared, no music to read. She was not a student or a professional. She was just Elena, a cleaning lady who played for herself and occasionally for old people who couldn't remember her name. She looked up and saw hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting. In the front row, several young students had phones raised, already recording. The woman with the pearl necklace whispered to her companion, her expression skeptical. Elena closed her eyes. What would Pavel say? The thought came to her suddenly, and with it a sense of calm. He would tell her to play what was in her heart. Elena placed her hands on the keys. The cool ivory felt familiar, like meeting an old friend. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were hesitant. This piano responded differently than her old keyboard at home or the nursing home piano. It was more sensitive, more alive. But after a few measures, her fingers remembered their work. The music flowed more easily. She played the piece she had been working on for years, the one that had no name because it wasn't really a piece at all. It was just the sound of her life. It began with a simple, lonely melody, the early morning hours in her apartment, the memory of Pavel, the empty space beside her in bed. Then it grew, adding harmonies that spoke of sunrise over the city, of the dignity she found in honest work, of the faces of the elderly residents she cared for. As she played, Elena forgot where she was. She forgot about the prestigious hall, the famous maestro, the judgmental audience. There was only the music, the conversation between her heart and her hands. The melody evolved, becoming something new even to her. This magnificent piano allowed her to express things she had never quite captured before. The pain of loss, yes, but also the quiet joy of small moments. The rhythm of mop strokes against a floor, the way light fell through windows at dawn, the smile of a lonely old man when she played his favorite song. Her calloused fingers, shaped by decades of labor, moved with a grace that belied their roughness. Elena felt tears on her cheeks but didn't stop to wipe them away. She hadn't cried while playing since Pavel's funeral, when she had come home to their empty apartment and played until her fingers cramped. The piece built to a gentle climax, not loud or showy, but emotionally rich. Then it settled back into the simple theme, now transformed by all that had come before. She ended with 3 soft chords that hung in the air like a question without an answer. When Elena opened her eyes, the hall was absolutely silent. For a horrible moment, she thought everyone had left while she was lost in the music. But no, they were still there, motionless in their seats, many with expressions of shock or wonder. The woman with the pearl necklace had a hand pressed to her mouth, and Maestro Volkov. Elena turned to find him standing by the piano, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question surprised her. She had expected criticism about her technique, about the wrong notes she knew she had hit, about the improper way she used the pedals. "No one really," she answered honestly. "My mother taught me basics when I was little. After that, I taught myself." Volkov shook his head in disbelief. "Not possible. Life taught me, Elena said with a small shrug. I just play what I feel. The maestro turned to the audience, his voice stronger now but still thick with emotion. Did you hear? Did you feel? This is why we make music. Not for technique, not for acclaim, but for this truth. The silence broke. Someone in the back began to clap, then another, and suddenly the whole hall erupted in applause. Elena sat frozen on the bench, unable to process what was happening. People were standing now, applauding louder. Go on, Volkov said gently. Stand up. They are applauding for you. Somehow, Elena rose from the bench. She gave an awkward little bow, unsure of the proper protocol. The applause continued. A young woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes while still holding her phone up, recording. I think, Volkov said, once the applause had died down. We have all been given a gift today, a reminder of what music is for. He turned to Elena. Thank you. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Her legs felt weak as she made her way back to the steps. The maestro accompanied her, his hand lightly on her elbow as if she were a distinguished guest rather than a cleaning lady who had stumbled into his master class. When she reached her seat, people turned to look at her differently now. The young man beside her whispered, "That was amazing," with genuine admiration in his voice. The masterclass concluded shortly after. Volkov gave a brief speech about the purpose of music and the importance of authentic expression. Elena barely heard his words. She was still floating somewhere between disbelief and joy, her heart pounding with the after-effects of the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of her life. As people began to file out, many glanced her way, some smiling, others still looking puzzled. Elena remained in her seat, waiting for the crowd to thin before attempting to leave. She needed a moment to collect herself. May I join you? Elena looked up to see Maestro Volkov standing in the aisle beside her row. Without waiting for an answer, he sat down in the empty seat next to her. Your piece, he said. It has no name? She shook her head. It's not really a proper piece. I just play it. It is most definitely a proper piece, and a remarkable one. He studied her face. You have never had formal training? No, we couldn't afford it when I was young. And later, life happened. Volkov nodded thoughtfully. Life happened. Yes, I can hear that in your music. So many young talents, they play perfectly but have nothing to say. They have not lived yet. He gestured toward the now empty stage. They play the notes but not the music between the notes. Elena wasn't sure how to respond. It seemed impossible that this world-renowned pianist was sitting beside her, talking about music as if she were his equal. I have a proposition for you, Elena. Volkov continued. There is a small recital next month at the community center downtown. Nothing fancy, just a gathering of music lovers. Would you consider playing your piece there? Her mouth fell open. Me at a recital? Yes, people should hear what you have to say. But I'm not a real musician. I'm just what? A cleaning lady? His eyes twinkled. Bach was just a church organist. Chopin was just a piano teacher. We are all just something. But when we play, he tapped his chest, from here we become more than our jobs or titles. I don't know, Elena said. I've never played in public before. Not really. What was this then? Volkov gestured around the empty hall. An accident, she said with a small smile. He laughed, a warm, rich sound. The best moments in life often are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Think about it. Call my assistant if you decide to join us. Elena took the card, her hand trembling slightly. Thank you. No, Elena, thank you. You reminded an old man why he fell in love with music in the first place. With that, he patted her hand and rose from his seat. Other people were waiting to speak with him at the edge of the stage. He nodded to them and made his way down the aisle, leaving Elena holding his card as if it were made of gold. She sat there long after most people had left, turning the card over in her fingers, trying to process everything that had happened. Finally, she tucked it carefully into her purse and stood up. Her legs still felt a bit unsteady, but her heart was lighter than it had been in years. As Elena made her way to the exit, she noticed the woman with the pearl necklace waiting near the door, apparently deep in conversation with a younger woman. When she saw Elena approaching, the woman broke off mid-sentence and stepped into her path. Excuse me, she said, her voice different now, less dismissive, more uncertain. Your playing was quite moving. I owe you an apology for earlier. Elena wasn't sure what to say. The last thing she had expected was an apology. "I wonder," the woman continued, "would you be interested in speaking with me about your music? I'm on the board of the Community Music Education Initiative. We're always looking for new perspectives." She held out a business card of her own. Elena took it, adding it to Volkov's in her purse. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Outside, the rain had stopped. Elena opened her umbrella anyway, needing something familiar to hold on to as she walked toward the bus stop. The sky was beginning to clear, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. She felt different, as if something fundamental had shifted inside her. For so many years she had kept her music private, a secret joy. Now it had been heard, really heard, and she could never go back to being invisible again. The next morning came too quickly. Elena's alarm rang at the usual time, 4:45 a.m., but for once she hit the snooze button. Her mind was still swimming with the events of the previous day. Had it really happened? Had she really played in front of all those people? In front of Maestro Volkov himself? The business cards in her purse proved it wasn't a dream. She had taken them out last night, placed them on her kitchen table, and stared at them for a long time before going to bed. By the time Elena arrived at the nursing home, the sun was just beginning to peak above the horizon. She was running late, something that almost never happened. She hurried through the employee entrance, changed into her gray uniform, and gathered her cleaning supplies. There she is. The booming voice belonged to Mr. Wilson, one of the residents who was always up early. He sat in his wheelchair in the hallway, a newspaper spread across his lap. "Our piano lady." Elena smiled at him, confused by his unusual enthusiasm. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." "Don't good morning me like nothing happened," he said, wheeling himself alongside her as she pushed her cart down the hall. "You're famous now." "What are you talking about?" He held up his tablet, a gift from his daughter that he mostly used for reading the news and playing chess. On the screen was a video. Elena stopped in her tracks when she recognized herself sitting at the piano in the conservatory hall. "How did you get that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's all over the internet," Mr. Wilson said proudly, as if he had something to do with it. "My daughter sent it to me this morning. Said it's getting thousands of views. That's you, isn't it?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. She watched a few seconds of the video, her own hands moving across the keys, her face turned slightly away from the camera. The angle suggested it had been taken by someone in the front rows. "I knew you were good," Mr. Wilson continued, "but this—" He shook his head in wonder. "Why didn't you tell us you were this good?" "I'm not—" Elena began, but she couldn't finish the sentence. According to Maestro Volkov, according to the audience that had stood and applauded, maybe she was good. Maybe she was even very good. It was a strange thought, one she wasn't ready to embrace. "Ms. Chen wants to see you," Mr. Wilson said, still grinning. "In her office. She sent me to find you when you came in." Elena thanked him and changed direction, heading toward the administrative wing. Her mind raced. Was she in trouble for being late? Did Ms. Chen regret giving her the tickets? Was the video somehow a problem? She knocked on the office door and Ms. Chen's voice called for her to enter. Inside, she found not just Ms. Chen but also 3 other staff members, all of them smiling at her. "There she is," Ms. Chen said, echoing Mr. Wilson's greeting. She crossed the room and took Elena's hands in hers. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to play at the master class?" "I didn't know," Elena said honestly. "It just happened." "Well, it's wonderful," Ms. Chen said. "Absolutely wonderful. We're all so proud of you." The other staff members nodded in agreement. One of them, a nurse named Rita, stepped forward. "My daughter was there," she said. "She's a student at the conservatory. She called me last night, all excited, saying, 'Mom, there was this older woman who played the most beautiful piece and the maestro cried.' I had no idea it was you until I saw the video this morning." Elena felt her face growing warm. "It wasn't anything special," she said. "I just played what I always play." "It was special," Ms. Chen insisted. "Very special. And it gives me an idea." She turned to the others. "What do you think about a small recital here at Sunshine Valley? We could invite the residents' families, the staff." "Oh, that would be lovely," Rita agreed. "We could set it up in the main recreation room." Elena's heart began to race. "I don't think— You don't have to decide right now," Ms. Chen assured her. "Just think about it." Back in the hallway, pushing her cart toward the first room on her cleaning schedule, Elena tried to make sense of what was happening. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from a woman who played the piano in private to someone who was being asked to perform not once, but twice. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Throughout the day, other staff members and several residents approached her, some with phones in hand to show her the video, others just wanting to congratulate her. By afternoon, Elena was exhausted from the attention. She found refuge in her work, in the familiar motions of cleaning that required little thought and allowed her mind to wander. As she mopped the hallway outside the recreation room, she heard the faint sound of piano music drifting from inside. Elena paused, listening. Someone was attempting to play a simplified version of Beethoven's Für Elise, hitting wrong notes frequently but persevering. She peeked through the doorway and saw Ms. Rivera seated at the piano, her arthritic fingers struggling with the keys. The elderly woman had mentioned once that she had taken lessons as a girl, but had stopped when her family could no longer afford them. Elena set her mop aside and entered the room. "Would you like some help?" she asked gently. Ms. Rivera looked up, her face lighting with recognition. "Oh, Elena. Yes, please. These old hands don't work like they used to." Elena sat beside her on the bench. "Try relaxing your wrist a bit more," she suggested, demonstrating the motion. "And for this part, use your fourth finger instead of your third." They worked together on the piece for nearly 20 minutes, Elena guiding Ms. Rivera's hands, offering suggestions, playing passages slowly so the older woman could see the proper technique. It was the most natural thing in the world, sharing what she knew, helping someone else find joy in music. "You're a good teacher," Ms. Rivera said when they finally stopped. "Patient, kind." "I'm not a teacher," Elena protested. "I just play." "Teaching is sharing what you love," Ms. Rivera said with the wisdom of her 93 years. "And you just did that beautifully." The words stayed with Elena as she finished her shift and boarded the bus home. Teaching. Sharing. These were new ways of thinking about her music, about herself. At home, Elena changed out of her uniform and made herself a simple dinner of soup and bread. After eating, she sat at her small keyboard and placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play the piece she had performed at the master class, but it felt different now. The notes were the same, but they carried new meaning, new possibilities. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Elena?" a young woman's voice asked. "This is Tanya, Maestro Volkov's assistant. He asked me to call you about the recital next month." Elena's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes, he mentioned it. So you'll do it?" "Wonderful. It's a small event, very informal. The maestro thought it would be perfect for your first public performance." First public performance. The words echoed in Elena's mind. As if there would be others. As if this was the beginning of something, not just a strange, one-time occurrence. I don't know, Elena said. "I'm not sure I'm ready." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The maestro said you might say that," Tanya replied. "He asked me to tell you something. He said music that stays hidden helps no one. Not the player, not the listener." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the truth of those words. Her music had been a private joy for so long. The thought of sharing it was frightening, but also liberating. "When is the recital?" she asked. 3 weeks from Saturday. 2:00. The maestro will be there to introduce you." After getting the details and ending the call, Elena sat quietly for a long time, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard keys. Then, decision made, she began to play in earnest, working on the piece that had moved an entire auditorium to its feet. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur. Elena continued her regular shifts at the nursing home, but her mornings and evenings were devoted to practice. She worked on refining the piece, giving it more structure while maintaining the emotional quality that had touched so many hearts. Word of her upcoming recital spread through the nursing home. Mr. Wilson insisted that a group of residents should attend, and Ms. Chen arranged for the facility's van to transport those who wanted to go. Elena felt both touched and nervous at the thought of familiar faces in the audience. The woman with the pearl necklace, whose name Elena learned was Dr. Harriet Porter, called twice. The first time was to discuss the Community Music Education Initiative and to invite Elena to speak with the board about her experiences as a self-taught musician. The second call was more personal. "I want to apologize again for my rudeness at the masterclass," Dr. Porter said. "It was inexcusable." "It's forgotten," Elena assured her. No, it shouldn't be, the woman insisted. It's important to acknowledge our failures, especially when they come from prejudice. I judged you by your appearance, not by what was in your heart. That's the opposite of what music should be about. The humility in the woman's voice surprised Elena. Perhaps people could change, could grow at any age. The day before the recital, Elena left work early with Ms. Chen's blessing. She went to a small salon near her apartment and had her hair trimmed neatly. She wasn't trying to look like someone else, just the best version of herself. That evening, she tried on the navy dress she had worn to the master class. It had been the nicest thing she owned, but now it seemed inadequate. After some thought, she took the bus downtown and visited a modest department store. She couldn't afford anything expensive, but she found a simple dress in a deep burgundy that suited her coloring and fit well. It was on sale, a lucky break. Back home, she stood in front of her small mirror and studied her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was still Elena, still a cleaning lady with calloused hands and lines around her eyes. But there was something different in her posture, in the set of her shoulders. She looked more certain, less invisible. "Well, Pavel," she said softly to the empty room, to the husband who had always believed in her. "What do you think? Am I ready for this?" In the silence that followed, Elena could almost hear his answer. "You've been ready your whole life." She smiled and turned away from the mirror. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. Tonight she would play one more time, just for herself and for Pavel's memory, before stepping into whatever new chapter was beginning. The community center was nothing like the grand conservatory. Its brick walls were worn, its wooden floors scuffed from decades of use. The room where the recital would be held had once been a gymnasium, with high windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage where an upright piano, not a gleaming grand, waited. Elena arrived an hour early, her new burgundy dress covered by her old winter coat. She carried her music in a folder, though she didn't really need it. The piece lived in her fingers now, in her heart. "You came." Tanya, Maestro Volkov's assistant, hurried over to greet her. She was younger than Elena had imagined from their phone conversations, perhaps in her late 20s, with warm eyes and a quick smile. "The maestro will be so pleased. He was worried you might change your mind." "I nearly did," Elena admitted. "Several times," Tanya laughed. "That's normal. Even professionals get nervous." She took Elena's coat and led her to a small room off the main hall. "You can wait here until the program begins. There's water, tea if you'd prefer." Left alone, Elena paced the small space, trying to calm her nerves. Through the thin walls, she could hear people arriving, chairs scraping against the floor, the hum of conversations. This wasn't like the master class, where she had been an anonymous figure in the back row until Volkov had pointed her out. Today, people were coming specifically to hear her play. The thought made her stomach tighten. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Maestro Volkov entered without waiting for a response, his presence filling the small room. "Ah, Elena, you look wonderful." He clasped her hands in his. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she answered honestly. He nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good, fear means you care. The day you stop feeling fear before playing is the day you should stop playing altogether. Do you still get scared? After all these years, all your success?" "Every time," he smiled. "But it is a different kind of fear now. Not fear of failure or judgment, but fear of not doing justice to the music." He released her hands and moved to the small window, looking out at nothing in particular. "Your piece, have you named it yet?" Elena shook her head. "I wouldn't know what to call it. Perhaps a name will come to you today." He turned back to her. "I have taken a liberty, I hope you don't mind. I've invited someone to hear you play. A friend who teaches at the conservatory. He works with non-traditional students, people who come to music later in life." Elena felt a flutter of panic. "I'm not looking to study at the conservatory." No, Volkov waved away her concern. "That is not why he is here. He also runs community music programs. After hearing about you, he was intrigued." Before Elena could respond, there was another knock. Tanya peeked in. "It's time, Maestro. The hall is full." Full? Elena had assumed there would be perhaps 20 or 30 people, mostly friends and supporters of the community center. Volkov must have read the alarm on her face. "Music brings people together," he said gently. "Your story has touched many hearts already." He offered his arm and Elena took it, grateful for the support. Her legs felt unsteady as they walked down the short hallway to the main room. At the doorway she paused, momentarily overwhelmed by the sight before her. Every seat was filled. There in the front row sat a group from the nursing home. Mr. Wilson in his wheelchair, Ms. Rivera with her cane, 3 other residents, and Ms. Chen beaming proudly. Behind them, Elena spotted Rita the nurse and several other staff members. Dr. Porter sat near the center, nodding in recognition when she caught Elena's eye. And scattered throughout the crowd were faces Elena didn't recognize. Young music students, elderly couples, families with children, people of all backgrounds. They had come to hear her, a cleaning lady who had never performed in public before 3 weeks ago. Volkov guided her to a seat at the side of the stage, then stepped up to the small podium. The room quieted immediately. "Welcome, friends," he began. "Today is not a formal concert. It is a gathering of people who love music, who understand that music speaks a language beyond words." He looked over at Elena. "A few weeks ago at a master class, I had the privilege of hearing a piece of music that reminded me why I became a musician in the first place." He spoke about the video that had circulated online, about the comments and messages he had received from people moved by Elena's playing. She listened with growing amazement. How was it possible that her simple melody had traveled so far, touched so many? "And now," Volkov said, "I am honored to introduce you to Elena Novak, who will share her music with us once more." The applause started before she even stood. Elena moved to the piano, adjusted the bench, and sat down. The keys before her looked both familiar and strange. She placed her hands on them, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. There were so many people watching, waiting. What if she couldn't recapture the emotion of that first performance? What if she hit wrong notes? What if... She closed her eyes and thought of Pavel, of early mornings at the nursing home piano, of Mr. Wilson listening with his eyes closed, of Ms. Rivera struggling to play with her arthritic hands, of all the moments, large and small, that had led her to this place. And then she began to play. The piece started as it always did, with the simple, solitary melody that spoke of quiet mornings and memories. But today it grew differently. As her confidence built, Elena added new elements, echoes of classical pieces she had loved for decades, hints of folk songs her mother had sung when she was a child. The music breathed and evolved, telling the story of her life but also reaching beyond it to something universal. She thought of Pavel, of the love they had shared, of the music that had sustained her after his death. A new section emerged, tender and wistful but not bitter, honoring loss without being defined by it. She thought of the nursing home residents, of their dignity in the face of age and illness, of their small joys and deep sorrows. The melody turned contemplative, respectful. And then she thought of the moment in the conservatory when her private music had suddenly become public, when strangers had heard what was in her heart. The piece swelled with wonder and gratitude. As she played the final passage, returning to the original theme but now transformed by all that had come before, Elena knew what the piece was called. The name came to her as clearly as if someone had whispered it in her ear. Invisible no more. The final notes hung in the air, and then there was silence. Pure, complete silence. Elena opened her eyes to see many in the audience wiping away tears. Maestro Volkov stood at the side of the stage, his face wet with his own tears. Then the applause began, growing until the old gymnasium seemed to shake with it. People rose to their feet. Mr. Wilson wheeled himself forward, clapping with more strength than Elena had thought he possessed. Ms. Chen was crying and smiling at the same time. A young girl in the third row looked at Elena with wide, wondering eyes, perhaps seeing a new possibility for her own future. Elena stood, legs trembling, and bowed awkwardly. The applause continued. She didn't know what to do, how long to stand there. Volkov came to her rescue, joining her on stage and taking her hand. "You have moved us all," he said, his voice carrying over the diminishing applause. "Thank you." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. People came up to speak with her, to thank her, to ask questions, to share what her music had meant to them. A young man with a music magazine wanted to interview her. Dr. Porter introduced her to colleagues from the Community Music Education Initiative, and the conservatory teacher Volkov had mentioned, a kind-faced man named Professor Chen, No relation to Ms. Chen from the nursing home, Elena learned. Spoke with her about community programs where she might share her gift with others. Not as a student, he clarified, seeming to sense her hesitation. As a teacher. I'm not qualified to teach, Elena protested. You teach by doing, he said simply. By showing others that music belongs to everyone, not just to those with formal training or expensive instruments. As the crowd finally began to thin, Ms. Rivera made her way to Elena's side, leaning heavily on her cane. I've been thinking, the elderly woman said without preamble. You helped me with my playing the other day. Would you consider giving me regular lessons? Nothing fancy, just once a week. I'd pay you, of course. Before Elena could respond, Mr. Wilson wheeled himself over. Get in line, Olivia, he said to Ms. Rivera. I asked her first. I've always wanted to learn, and now I finally found the right teacher. Elena looked from one eager face to the other, a laugh bubbling up inside her. I suppose I could teach both of you, she said. If you don't mind sharing a lesson time. Later, as Elena gathered her things to leave, Maestro Volkov approached her one last time. Your piece has a name now? He asked. She nodded. Invisible no more. He considered this, then smiled. Perfect. And what about the composer? What is her name? Elena paused. For so long she had been just Elena the cleaning lady, not a musician, not a composer, not a teacher. But today had changed everything. Elena Novak, she said, speaking her full name with a new sense of pride. The composer's name is Elena Novak. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light. Elena walked toward the bus stop, but her steps were lighter now, as if some heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The burgundy dress swished around her legs, and she found herself humming a new melody, the beginning of her next piece, though she didn't know it yet. At the corner, she stopped and looked back at the community center, at the people still streaming out, talking animatedly about what they had heard. They had come to listen to her, and she had given them a piece of herself. It was frightening and wonderful all at once. Well, Pavel, she whispered to the sky, to the husband who had always believed music would save her. What happens next? The future stretched before her, full of possibilities she had never imagined. Music lessons to give, community programs to explore. Perhaps even more compositions to write, more performances to give. Not a new life exactly, but her life expanded, enriched, made visible at last. Elena smiled and continued on her way, already hearing the next piece taking shape in her mind, her heart, her fingers. This was just the beginning.